And now, a story from the Appleseed.
So the story I'm going to tell you now is called The Vizier and the Gibbon. Now, first of all, because storytelling happens mainly in your mind, doesn't it? It's the pictures that you're putting. I need to make sure you know. Do you know what a vizier is? Do you know what a vizier is? It's kind of like an advisor to the king. So kind of an elderly wise man who advises the king on what to do, you know? Do you know what a gibbon looks like? A gibbon, now, if you are a naturalist, forgive me, I think it's part of the ape family, but they are uncanny. They look almost human, you know, they have long legs and long arms, and sometimes they walk upright, and they make the most unreal noises, and they have a temperament. Or they're feisty. Let's just say they're feisty. Do you know what feisty, yes? They have chutzpah, as we would say. So this story is the vizier who married a gibbon. Yes, I see eyebrows going up. Don't worry, it's just a story. It's not something that happens in Europe. There was once a vizier whose job it was to advise the king. And although he was not of noble birth, he was of good birth, and he loved the king's daughter. And he knew that the king would never let him marry the daughter, the princess. But his heart longed for her, and so, whether this is good or bad, I am not going to judge. He hatched a plan. A devious plan, not a good plan. First of all, he went to the royal astrologer, the seer, and he crossed his palm with gold. And he said, will you draw up an astrological chart for the king that says if he chooses his son-in-law, there'll be disaster. And the astrologer, who didn't earn a lot of money, said, yes, all right then. So he did. So the first thing the vizier does is he goes to the king and says, Your Majesty, I think you need to look at this. And he lays the plans out and he says, look, if you marry your daughter off to someone that you choose, any offspring, any children of that marriage will rise up and kill you and take your throne. He was riffing now. He's got the bit between his teeth. He was making things up, and the poor king, who was a bit gullible, a bit foolish, don't really know how he got to be king. Well, not go down that road at the moment. And he says, well, what should I do? Now, you have to remember, parents were a lot harsher then. And the vizier had already thought this out. He had walked a river, and he had seen that there was one little inlet where the river came round and eddied and whirled, and he'd got a plan. He'd mapped that part of the river. He'd hired a place up in the mountains, and he'd gone to his neighbours and said, I am going to marry a young wife, and she's a bit willful. Now you have to, this is an old story, but he said, so if you hear the odd slap and the odd scream, it's just me disciplining her, don't come in. I know. But you'll be thrilled at the end of this story. Don't come in. And so with this in his mind and all this plotting and planning, he goes to the king, and the king says, well, what should I do? I have a plan, Your Majesty. What we must do is invite your daughter to a feast, and because we're not savages, we will drug her wine, put her in a casket, we'll line it nicely with silks, because she is a princess, and then we'll nail the lid down and throw her in the river. And the king says, what will happen then? And he said, well, it will go out to sea, it will get found by a boat, it will be taken to a foreign land, and there she will marry, and it won't be a husband of your choosing, and everything will be fine. And the king, because he is a bit foolish, went, all right. Sounds like a great plan. Because parenting back in those days, lot to be desired. But you see, the princess's serving maid overheard everything. She ran to the princess and she said, this is what he's planning to do. Do you trust me, Your Majesty? And she said, you're like a sister to me. And she said, well, I know what he's planning. That box will end up in that little eddy and he'll fish it out. And he'll take you away. But my brother and I have fished that river all of our lives. We know that there's one further upstream. We'll rescue you. You just have to go along with the plan. Drink the wine, fall asleep, leave everything else to us. And that's what she did. She went and she drank the wine and she fell asleep, and the vizier thought, oh, my love. Put her in the box, they nailed it down, bit of tar, so, it was watertight because they were caring like that, and then threw it into the river. Well, of course, the vizier goes straight to town, leaps upon the back of a cart that he's hired with 2 henchmen, and off he goes to retrieve the woman of his dreams. But you see, the first thing that happens is that box goes into the first little eddy, the first little inlet, and there is her maid and her brother, and they pull it out and they open it up, and the maid's brother lifts out this woman, and what happens between them is more stories than I can tell you. But he lays her onto the cart, and then they put inside a sleeping gibbon. Nail it back down and put it back in the river. Well, the vizier arrives, he sees his box, he gets his henchmen to put it on the cart, and they arrive at his home in the mountains, and he pays the men off, and the box beginning to rattle. He thinks, oh, she's woken up. Oh, she seems a bit angry. And they put the box in, and off they go. Now the box is beginning to shake and rattle, and so he opens the box, and I don't know if you've ever encountered an irate gibbon before. It's an interesting phenomena. Well, this gibbon leaps out and he grabs hold of the vizier, and he's punching him and smacking him, and the vizier's crying out, and all the neighbours are going, oh, she really is willful. Well, not interfere. Well, not interfere. And he's getting slapped around. But you see, weird though is he really did love the princess. And so instead of going, oh my goodness, somebody's put a gibbon in a box, because love can kind of blind you a bit, he goes, my love, who has bewitched you so? Who has done this terrible thing to you? I will lift this curse if it takes a lifetime. Have a banana. Have this bowl of fruit. Well, the gibbon, pacified by the offerings of fruit and vegetables, and has her hair combed, he massages his little paws and his feet and drapes it in finery, and the gibbon's lying there, and he says, I will give up my job and I will devote my life to you, my love. Gets a priest to marry them, a rather perplexed priest, but he says, no, it's a woman under an enchantment. And so the vizier gives up his job and spends the rest of his life married to a gibbon that he cherishes beyond measure, and a gibbon that has never known such luxury. Unfortunately, people do talk, and so the story of the vizier who married a gibbon went out into the world, and now you know it too. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us for A Story from the Appleseed.